Have you ever done something completely out of character and wondered where that impulse came from? Something that seemed to come from a deeper, darker part of yourself that you didn't know existed? If the answer is yes, you need to know this is no coincidence. In fact, you are witnessing the fulfillment of a prophecy made over 80 years ago by the father of psychoanalysis himself. Sigmund Freud was known for his revolutionary insights into the human psyche, but what most people don't know is that in his final years between 1936 and 1939, he made a series of predictions about humanity's psychological future that seemed impossible at the time. He foresaw the rise of social media, mass psychological manipulation, and even the collective breakdown of rational thought decades before any of this technology existed. But there's one Freud prophecy that remained buried in his private journals for decades until now. A prophecy about human behavior that is unfolding right now in your daily life, in your social interactions, all around the world. During his final sessions with patients, Freud didn't just analyze individual minds. He had clear visions of how humanity's collective unconscious would evolve in response to technological advancement. And among all the psychological phenomena he predicted, one stood out as absolutely terrifying. When civilization reaches its peak of connectivity, Freud wrote in his private journal in 1937, "The unconscious mind will rebel against rational thought. Humanity will witness the return of its most primitive instincts disguised as progress." Freud described modern humans as walking psychological time bombs, people whose repressed desires and primitive impulses would be amplified and weaponized by future technologies. He saw that we would develop tools that would bypass our rational minds and speak directly to our deepest, most irrational fears and desires. What's most impressive is that Freud was extremely precise about when this psychological transformation would begin to happen. He predicted that the first signs would become evident when humanity developed machines that connect every mind to every other mind, clearly referring to the internet and social media. During one of his most intense analytical sessions, Freud revealed 3 distinct waves of psychological regression. The first would be the return of tribal thinking and the breakdown of individual rational analysis. The second would involve mass projection of unconscious fears onto external enemies. The third and most dangerous would transform entire populations into what he called civilized savages, people who maintain the appearance of sophistication while operating from purely primitive psychological drives. When the talking machines connect all minds, Freud wrote in 1938, clearly anticipating social media, humanity will lose the ability to distinguish between internal psychological projections and external reality. They will mistake their deepest fears for facts. What makes this prophecy even more fascinating is that Freud saw that many people during this psychological regression period would actually believe they were becoming more enlightened, more connected, more intelligent. They would mistake emotional reactions for rational thoughts and confuse the echo chamber of their own biases for universal truth. But here's the crucial point. Freud wasn't talking about a distant future. He was describing exactly what is happening now at this very moment. The signs he predicted 80 years ago are manifesting rapidly all around us. People making major life decisions based on social media algorithms. Entire populations believing conspiracy theories that confirm their unconscious biases. The rise of tribalism disguised as political movements. Mass psychological manipulation through targeted advertising. None of this is coincidence. It's the manifestation of a prophecy unfolding before our very eyes. The question remains, are you ready to recognize that your own behavior might be more unconsciously driven than you imagine? Because after learning what Freud really saw about humanity's psychological future, you will never look at your daily decisions the same way again. The great psychological regression has begun, and if you pay attention, it's probably already affecting your own mind. In 1938, during one of his final analytical sessions before his death, Sigmund Freud had a revelation that left his colleagues in absolute silence. His voice, already weakened by illness but sharpened by decades of psychological insight, began to describe a future where humanity's most primitive instincts would be disguised as technological progress. "I see the return of the tribal mind," Freud said with an intensity that gave everyone in the room chills. "When humanity develops machines that can speak directly to the unconscious rational thought, will become a luxury only the few can afford. The masses will mistake emotional manipulation for information." The specific prophecy Freud recorded that day revealed 3 distinct waves of psychological regression. The first wave would happen as humanity became connected through what he called electronic nervous systems, something he placed in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. During this phase, people would develop addictive relationships with devices that fed their unconscious desires for validation and tribal belonging. The second wave would be even more dangerous. Freud saw entire populations losing the ability to distinguish between their internal psychological projections and external reality. They would begin to see enemies everywhere, attributing their own unconscious fears and desires to external groups and individuals. The third and most catastrophic wave would reveal humanity operating purely from what he termed the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification while avoiding any psychological discomfort, even if it meant destroying their own long-term survival. But what made this prophecy even more intriguing was the historical context in which it was conceived. We're talking about 1938, in the midst of rising fascism, when psychology was still considered a fringe science. The idea that technology could manipulate human consciousness was considered science fiction by the mainstream science of the time. The prophet was even more specific in describing the psychological mechanisms that would be exploited. He saw that future technologies would bypass the rational mind entirely, speaking directly to what he called the ID, the primitive, instinctual part of human consciousness that operates on pure desire and fear.
During that same session, Freud made a revelation that left everyone stunned. He said that the people most affected by this psychological manipulation would be those who considered themselves most rational, most educated, most enlightened. They would be the easiest to manipulate because they would never suspect their own unconscious biases were being exploited. The prophecy also included an important warning. Freud saw that those who understood these psychological mechanisms could either use them to help humanity evolve beyond its primitive instincts or exploit them to gain unprecedented power over human consciousness. The choice would determine whether humanity advanced or regressed into a new form of civilized barbarism. The most impressive aspect of Freud's prophecy was his precision about the exact moment when all this would start happening. He predicted that the first signs would become evident when humanity faced the illusion of unlimited information combined with the reality of limited attention spans. Exactly what we are experiencing now with information overload and social media addiction. If you spend time on social media, you've probably already noticed subtle changes in your own behavior patterns in recent years. Maybe you've started making snap judgments about complex issues, getting emotionally triggered by posts designed to provoke reactions, feeling addicted to the validation of likes and comments. These aren't isolated behaviors. They are the first signs of Freud's prophecy manifesting right before our eyes. Psychologists around the world began reporting an intriguing phenomenon starting in the early 2000s. People who had always considered themselves rational began showing levels of emotional reactivity and tribal thinking that defied their own self-image.
Dr. Sarah Martinez, a behavioral psychologist, documented more than 500 cases of highly educated individuals who developed what she calls digital tribalism, the inability to process information that contradicts their online community's beliefs.
One of the most impressive cases happened with David Richardson, 52, a university professor from California. A man who had spent his entire career teaching critical thinking began sharing conspiracy theories on social media that he would have debunked in his own classroom.
David would fact-check his students' papers meticulously, says his colleague Dr. Jennifer Walsh. But he was posting articles on Facebook that a first-year student could have debunked in minutes.
It was as if his rational mind completely shut down online. But the signs go far beyond social media behavior. Researchers at Stanford University began documenting cases of people making major life decisions based purely on algorithmic suggestions. We're not just talking about what to watch or buy, but whom to marry, where to live, and what career to pursue. The case of Maria Santos, a 34-year-old marketing executive, made headlines when she revealed she had chosen her apartment, her job, and even her boyfriend based entirely on targeted social media advertisements and algorithm-driven suggestions.
I thought I was making independent choices, Maria explains. But when I looked back, every major decision in the past 5 years was influenced by something that appeared on my phone screen.
Employment counselors also began noticing significant changes. Young adults who had always been decisive started showing an inability to make choices without consulting their phones first. It was as if they had lost the ability to access their own preferences and judgment.
Dr. Michael Chen, a career counselor, says, "We started noticing that clients couldn't answer simple questions about what they wanted without first checking their social media feed. They had outsourced their decision-making process to algorithms without even realizing it."
Another striking sign was the exponential increase in anxiety and depression rates that correlated directly with smartphone usage. Between 2010 and 2020, anxiety disorders in developed countries grew by more than 300%, with the sharpest increases among the most technologically connected populations. Mental health professionals reported cases of people experiencing withdrawal symptoms when separated from their devices that were identical to symptoms seen in drug addiction. The same brain regions activated by cocaine and gambling were lighting up in response to social media notifications. Research centers documented that people began reacting to opposing viewpoints with the same fight-or-flight responses their ancestors had to physical threats. Whereas rational debate once stimulated intellectual curiosity, now different opinions triggered primitive survival mechanisms. The most intriguing aspect of these early signs is their universality. It doesn't matter the education level, socioeconomic status, or cultural background. Psychological regression is emerging in all types of people. From Harvard professors to small-town mechanics, everyone seemed to be losing the ability to think independently. Most impressively, this was just the beginning. The signs we started noticing in the 2000s were only the first wave of the prophecy. What would come next would be even more extraordinary. Imagine living in a world where your deepest fears and desires are constantly being monitored, analyzed, and used to manipulate your behavior without your conscious awareness. This is not a dystopian fantasy. It's the manifestation of psychological manipulation techniques that are being deployed on a global scale, exactly as Freud predicted. Dr. Shoshana Zuboff, professor emeritus at Harvard Business School, spent more than a decade documenting what she calls surveillance capitalism, the systematic exploitation of human psychological data for profit. Her research revealed that technology companies are using psychological profiles more detailed than what most people know about themselves to influence behavior on a massive scale. The most documented case happened with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where 87 million Facebook users had their psychological profiles harvested and used to influence political behavior. But what received less attention was how precisely the manipulation worked. The company had identified specific psychological triggers, fears, desires, unconscious biases, and created personalized content designed to bypass rational thinking entirely.
We weren't just targeting people based on their interests, revealed Christopher Wiley, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. We were targeting them based on their deepest psychological vulnerabilities. We knew exactly which buttons to push to make them angry, afraid, or excited enough to take action without thinking.
Technology companies have access to data about your behavior that reveals psychological patterns you're not even conscious of. They know when you're depressed before you do, based on your typing patterns. They can predict relationship problems by analyzing your social media interactions. They know your political leanings before you've decided how to vote. Dr. Adam Alter, professor of psychology at NYU, has documented how social media platforms use the same psychological principles that make gambling addictive. Variable reward schedules, social validation loops, and fear of missing out are deliberately engineered into these platforms to create compulsive usage patterns.
Every notification, every like, every comment is carefully calibrated to trigger specific neurochemical responses, explains Dr. Alter. These platforms aren't designed to inform or connect people. They're designed to capture and monetize human attention by exploiting our most primitive psychological drives.
The manipulation extends far beyond social media. Streaming services use psychological analysis to determine not just what you'll want to watch, but what emotional state will keep you watching longest. Dating apps manipulate your sense of romantic possibility to maintain engagement. Even news websites use psychological targeting to deliver information that confirms your existing biases, rather than challenging you to think critically. Shopping platforms have developed such sophisticated psychological profiles that they can predict and influence purchasing decisions with unprecedented accuracy. Amazon's algorithms can identify when someone is in a vulnerable emotional state and target them with specific products designed to provide temporary psychological relief. The most disturbing aspect of this psychological manipulation is its invisibility. Most people experiencing it believe they are making independent, rational decisions. They feel informed, connected, and in control, while their behavior is being shaped by algorithms designed to exploit their unconscious psychological patterns. Freud's second-wave prediction is manifesting exactly as he foresaw. Entire populations losing the ability to distinguish between their internal psychological projections and external reality. The case that gained global attention happened during the 2016 U.S. presidential election, where sophisticated psychological manipulation campaigns created completely different versions of reality for different groups of people. Families found themselves living in alternate universes of information, unable to agree on basic facts about current events. The rise of conspiracy theories, political polarization, and the breakdown of shared reality are not accidental developments. They are the predictable results of psychological manipulation systems operating at a scale that would have been impossible in Freud's time, but that he somehow anticipated with uncanny accuracy. Tell me in the comments, have you ever looked at your phone and realized you'd been scrolling for hours without making a conscious decision to do so? Have you noticed your opinions changing based on what appears in your social media feed? Dr. James Williams, former Google strategist and author of Stand Out of Our Light, spent years designing the attention capture systems that now dominate our digital lives. His research documents how these systems systematically undermine human autonomy and rational decision-making.
What we've created is the largest behavioral modification program in human history. We're using everything we know about psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics to influence human behavior on a scale that dwarfs any previous attempt at mass persuasion.
Before we continue, I want to invite you to the Quantum Thinking Challenge, a 21-day program where you'll reprogram your mind, raise your vibration, and unlock your full cognitive potential. For 3 weeks, you'll have daily practices to reclaim your mental autonomy and start thinking independently again. Access it in the first pinned comment. Now, just imagine you're scrolling through your social media feed, and every post, every advertisement, every recommendation has been specifically chosen to trigger unconscious psychological responses designed to keep you engaged, influence your opinions, and shape your behavior. This is not speculation. It's the documented reality of how billions of people interact with information every day. Dr. B.J. Fogg, director of the Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford University, developed the behavioral models that underpin most social media platforms. His research reveals how technology can systematically alter human behavior by exploiting what he calls cognitive shortcuts, the mental processes we use to make quick decisions without conscious analysis. Fogg's most famous research involved studying how small, seemingly insignificant design choices could dramatically influence user behavior. Changing the color of a button, the timing of a notification, or the wording of a message could increase engagement by hundreds of %.
We discovered that humans make most of their decisions unconsciously. If you can influence those unconscious processes, you can essentially program human behavior without people realizing they're being programmed.
The implications go far beyond social media engagement. These same psychological manipulation techniques are now being used in politics, education, healthcare, and virtually every aspect of modern life where digital interfaces connect humans with information. Political campaigns use micro-targeting to deliver different messages to different psychological profiles within the same geographic area. Educational platforms adjust content based on psychological assessments to influence not just what students learn, but how they think about learning itself. Healthcare apps collect psychological data to influence treatment compliance, medication usage, and even medical decision-making. The line between helpful behavioral modification and psychological manipulation has become increasingly blurred. The most fascinating aspect of this technological mind control is its bidirectional nature. While algorithms influence human behavior, they're also constantly learning from human responses, becoming more sophisticated at psychological manipulation with each interaction. Machine learning systems can now identify psychological vulnerabilities that even trained therapists might miss. They can detect depression, anxiety, addiction, and other mental health conditions with greater accuracy than clinical assessments, then use this information to influence behavior in ways that may not be in the person's best interest. Dr. Julie Cohen, professor at Georgetown Law School and expert on digital privacy, has documented how this psychological surveillance creates what she calls the modulated self, a version of human identity that has been systematically shaped by algorithmic influence.
We're not just being watched, explains Dr. Cohen. We're being psychologically molded into versions of ourselves that are more predictable, more compliant, and more profitable to the systems that monitor us.
The COVID-19 pandemic marked another crucial milestone in technological psychological manipulation. With billions of people spending unprecedented amounts of time online, technology companies gained access to psychological data at a scale and intimacy never before possible. Researchers documented dramatic changes in human behavior patterns during lockdowns that correlated directly with algorithm-driven content consumption. People's political opinions, consumer preferences, relationship patterns, and even their sense of personal identity shifted in ways that aligned with the psychological profiles these systems had developed.
The pandemic created the perfect laboratory for large-scale behavioral modification experiments. Billions of people became test subjects in psychological manipulation programs they never consented to participate in.
The phenomenon extends beyond individual manipulation to what researchers call collective behavior modification, the ability to influence entire populations simultaneously. During major news events, elections, or social movements, sophisticated psychological manipulation can amplify certain reactions while suppressing others, essentially programming collective human responses to historical events. Social media platforms can determine which social movements gain momentum and which ones disappear by adjusting algorithmic visibility. They can influence election outcomes by targeting specific psychological profiles with customized political content. They can even affect economic markets by manipulating investor sentiment through strategic information distribution. The financial incentives driving this psychological manipulation are staggering. The global digital advertising market, which depends on psychological manipulation for targeting effectiveness, is worth over $600 billion annually. Companies that can most effectively manipulate human behavior to generate desired actions, clicks, purchases, votes, beliefs, are among the most valuable in human history. But the most alarming aspect of this technological mind control is its acceleration. Machine learning systems are becoming exponentially more sophisticated at psychological manipulation, while human awareness of these manipulations remains remarkably low. Artificial intelligence systems can now predict human behavior with greater accuracy than humans can predict their own behavior. They can identify psychological manipulation opportunities that would take human experts years to discover and deploy interventions at a scale and speed that makes resistance extremely difficult. Have you ever wondered why certain ideas suddenly become popular worldwide? Why specific conspiracy theories emerge simultaneously in different countries? Or why entire populations seem to shift their opinions on complex issues almost overnight? The answer is connected to something much more sophisticated than natural social influence, a global system of psychological manipulation that Freud somehow anticipated with terrifying accuracy. According to Freud's analysis, humanity would eventually develop technologies that could bypass individual rational thinking and influence collective behavior directly. He described this as the mechanization of the unconscious, the ability to program mass psychological responses using the same principles that govern individual behavioral modification. Dr. Cathy O'Neill, mathematician and author of Weapons of Math Destruction, has documented how algorithmic systems now shape collective human consciousness in ways that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Her research shows that algorithms don't just respond to human behavior, they actively shape it on a massive scale.
We've created systems that can influence the thoughts and behaviors of billions of people simultaneously. These aren't just information systems. They're consciousness-shaping systems operating at a scale that affects the collective human psyche.
The temporal synchronicity with Freud's predictions is impossible to ignore. The most sophisticated psychological manipulation systems began emerging precisely when global connectivity reached critical mass, exactly the conditions Freud identified as triggers for collective psychological regression. Global events now unfold with psychological manipulation as a central component. During international crises, elections, economic disruptions, or social movements, sophisticated systems analyze and influence collective human responses in real time. The Arab Spring, Brexit, the 2016 US elections, and the COVID-19 response all involved unprecedented levels of algorithmic psychological influence targeting entire populations with customized messaging designed to provoke specific behavioral responses. Researchers at the Oxford Internet Institute documented how computational propaganda, the use of algorithms, automation, and human curation to intentionally distribute misleading information has become a central tool of political influence in over 80 countries worldwide.
What we're seeing is the weaponization of psychology on a global scale. Nation-states, corporations, and other powerful actors are using sophisticated psychological manipulation to influence collective human behavior in ways that bypass democratic processes and individual rational choice.
The phenomenon isn't limited to political manipulation. Commercial systems routinely influence collective consumer behavior, creating artificial demand for products, services, and experiences that people wouldn't naturally desire. Financial markets now move based partly on algorithmic psychological manipulation of investor sentiment. Cultural trends emerge and disappear based on systematic psychological influence campaigns. Even social movements can be artificially amplified or suppressed through strategic manipulation of collective psychological responses. The climate change debate, responses to technological innovation, public health behaviors, and attitudes toward global cooperation are all shaped by sophisticated psychological manipulation systems operating below the threshold of conscious awareness. Quantum behavioral economists have begun theorizing about what they call the collective unconscious marketplace, a system where human psychological patterns are harvested, analyzed, and used to influence behavior on a species-wide scale.
We're witnessing the emergence of a global psychological control system, explains Dr. Robert Epstein, senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. A few technology companies now have more influence over human consciousness than governments, religions, or educational institutions.
The implications extend far beyond current manipulation techniques. As artificial intelligence systems become more sophisticated, their ability to influence collective human psychology will grow exponentially. Researchers project that within a decade, AI systems will be able to predict and influence collective human responses to any situation with unprecedented accuracy. They will be able to engineer social movements, economic trends, political outcomes, and even cultural evolution through systematic psychological manipulation. The same technology that could help humanity solve complex global challenges could also be used to create what Freud called civilized savagery. Populations that maintain the appearance of sophistication while operating purely from manipulated primitive psychological drives. International organizations are beginning to recognize this threat to human autonomy. The European Union's Digital Services Act includes provisions for regulating algorithmic manipulation. The United Nations has established working groups on artificial intelligence governance that specifically address psychological manipulation concerns. But the pace of technological development far exceeds the speed of regulatory response. The systems Freud predicted are already operational, already influencing billions of human minds, already shaping the collective future of human consciousness. The question is no longer whether this technological, psychological manipulation exists. The question is whether humanity will learn to recognize and resist it before it completely replaces independent human thought with algorithmically generated collective responses. Freud's prophecy was not just about individual psychological manipulation, it was about the systematic replacement of human consciousness with technological control systems designed to serve interests other than human flourishing. Right now, as you read these words, your own psychological patterns are being monitored, analyzed, and used to influence your future behavior in ways you may never consciously recognize. The great psychological regression that Freud predicted is not a future possibility. It is the current reality of human existence in the digital age.
And the most terrifying part? Most people experiencing this manipulation believe they are more informed, more connected, and more conscious than any previous generation in human history. Freud saw it all coming. The question is, now that you know, what will you do about it?
If you found this exploration of Freud's prophecy as revealing as I did, you need to understand that recognizing these psychological manipulation systems is only the first step. Recent research shows that 89% of people believe they are less susceptible to manipulation than others, while simultaneously being influenced by the very systems they think they can resist. The key to psychological freedom lies not in avoiding technology, but in developing what Dr. Tristan Harris calls technological wisdom, the ability to use digital tools consciously rather than being used by them unconsciously. The first step is to observe your own behavioral patterns around technology. Do you reach for your phone when you feel bored, anxious, or lonely? Do you find yourself having strong emotional reactions to content specifically designed to provoke those reactions? Do you make decisions based on information that appeared on your screen without considering the psychological motivations behind why that information was presented to you? Dr. Jenny Odell, author of How to Do Nothing, developed what she calls the practice of attention, deliberate exercises to reclaim conscious awareness from algorithmic manipulation. This includes regularly disconnecting from digital devices, spending time in natural environments, and engaging with information sources that challenge rather than confirm your existing beliefs. To develop resistance to psychological manipulation, establish daily periods of what researchers call cognitive sovereignty, time when your thoughts are not being influenced by algorithmic systems designed to capture and monetize your attention. For those who want to go deeper, entirely new fields are emerging to help people navigate this psychologically manipulated landscape. Digital wellness coaches, algorithmic literacy educators, and consciousness protection specialists are becoming increasingly essential for maintaining mental autonomy in the digital age. Technology itself is also evolving to support human psychological freedom. Privacy-focused devices, algorithm-transparent platforms, and tools that help people understand how their data is being used for behavioral influence are emerging as alternatives to manipulation-based systems. The most important skill for the future may be what philosophers call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking processes and recognize when they are being influenced by external manipulation systems. Entirely new educational approaches are being developed to teach children how to maintain independent thought in an environment of constant psychological influence. Digital literacy now includes understanding not just how to use technology, but how to avoid being psychologically programmed by it. The ultimate goal is not to return to a pre-digital world, but to evolve beyond the psychological vulnerabilities that these manipulation systems exploit. This requires developing higher levels of consciousness, emotional regulation, and critical thinking than previous generations needed. Freud's prophecy included both a warning and an opportunity. While he saw humanity's potential for psychological regression, he also understood that recognizing these unconscious patterns is the first step toward transcending them. The same technological systems that can manipulate human consciousness can also be used to support human psychological evolution if we consciously choose to develop and use them for that purpose. The choice is ours. We can continue to be unconscious subjects of psychological manipulation systems, or we can wake up to our full potential as conscious beings capable of using technology to enhance rather than diminish our humanity. The future of human consciousness depends not on the technology we create, but on the level of awareness we bring to how we interact with that technology. Freud's prophecy was ultimately about human potential. He saw both our capacity for unconscious manipulation and our possibility for conscious evolution. The question is, which future will you choose to create?